The air in King's Landing was thick with secrets, but none heavier than the truth that Lord Eddard Stark had discovered. Sitting in the damp darkness of the Red Keep's dungeons, Ned had accepted that honor meant little in a kingdom ruled by liars and snakes. He had trusted the wrong people, believed justice would speak louder than whispers, and now his life hung on the words of a boy king and a lion queen. But far from his cell, the winds had already begun to change. At River Run, where Robb Stark had rallied his bannermen to answer his father's arrest with swords, word arrived not from a raven, but from a quiet man cloaked in the colours of no house. He carried no name, only a message. A whisper passed from Varys to Maester Luwin, and now to Robb. "There is still time if you dare." Robb, barely a man but already called the Young Wolf, knew what was at stake. His father's head, his sisters' lives, the honour of House Stark. But what Varys proposed, through layers of spies and bribes, was madness. Break Lord Eddard free before Cersei could kill him to seal her son's reign. It was Jon Snow, his bastard brother still posted at the wall, who answered the summons Robb sent in secrecy. Desertion from the Night's Watch was punishable by death, but Jon didn't hesitate. Ghost at his side, sword at his hip, he rode hard and fast through the haunted forests and snowy paths until he reached Robb under cover of night. He arrived gaunt, cold and burning with a silent fury. "They'll kill him," Jon said simply. "And they'll kill Arya next." The plan that unfolded was stitched with blood, risk, and the cold steel of desperation. With Varys playing the quiet puppeteer behind the court's curtains, a tunnel beneath the Red Keep, forgotten by time, but remembered by spiders, was reopened. They would have one chance, the night of King Joffrey's so-called mercy. When Ned was meant to confess his crimes and beg forgiveness, the city was restless. Sansa prayed for mercy. Arya was hidden by Yoren of the Night's Watch, who had seen too many innocents die to leave another one behind. Cersei wore smugness like a crown, and the people wanted blood. But Ned Stark never reached the steps of Baelor's Sept. As the city gathered, waiting for the traitor's confession, a fire broke out in Flea Bottom. A small blaze, started by a drunk or so it seemed. But in the confusion, as gold cloaks were pulled away to handle the spreading chaos, something else moved in the shadows. Beneath the keep, past cobwebs and bones and the old smell of rot, Jon and Robb waited. The tunnel was dark and damp, but Ghost's eyes shone like pale moons, alert to every sound. Varys had arranged for Ned's cell to be left unlocked, just once, by a certain trembling jailer, whose purse had grown fat overnight. Time slowed. Footsteps echoed. Then he appeared, taller than they remembered, thinner, but with that same heavy grace. Eddard Stark looked at them, his sons, as if waking from a nightmare he'd resigned to die in. "Robb, Jon." "No time," Jon said. They moved in silence. Robb led the way, sword drawn. Jon covered the rear, Ghost padding beside him, teeth bared. Ned could barely keep up. His leg was still stiff, his ribs sore from beatings, but he didn't stop. The escape had to work. There would be no second chance. Above them the city roared. The stage was empty. The boy king sat waiting. Cersei's eyes narrowed as whispers began to rise. The traitor wasn't coming. Where was Ned Stark? Panic would soon follow. The lions would smell blood. But by the time the bells of Baelor rang again, the wolf had already vanished from the den of lions. The escape wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a darker road. Outside King's Landing, the forest welcomed them like an old friend with 1,000 secrets. The sun had just started rising, golden rays pushing through the dense leaves, but none of the three men slowed down to admire it. Robb led them down narrow trails that no southern knight would know, paths his bannermen had marked on stolen maps with invisible ink and blood. Jon rode behind their father, watching their rear like a ghost in black. Ned said little, his face pale with exhaustion. He was alive but barely. The wounds from his time in the dungeons ran deeper than bruises or broken ribs. He had seen the rot in the heart of the capital, and he knew now just how far the Lannisters would go to keep power. What haunted him more than anything, though, was the cost of his silence. His honor was a wound he couldn't bandage. "They'll kill her," he finally muttered, as they stopped to rest by a stream. His voice cracked and low. Sansa, she's still there. Jon's jaw tightened. Arya is with Yoren. He'll protect her. But we can't help Sansa now. Not yet. Robb clenched his fists. We'll get her back. But first, we get to Riverrun. We get home. Home, Ned repeated, like the word meant something different now. There's no home left if they catch us. You understand that, don't you? They all did. What they had done, breaking Ned out of the Red Keep, was treason beyond forgiveness. The whole realm would believe the worst, that Ned Stark had escaped justice, that his sons had conspired to rebel, that the North had turned traitor, and they weren't wrong. Not entirely. By nightfall, ravens would carry the news to every corner of Westeros. Robb Stark, the young wolf, was no longer just marching to negotiate. He was a declared enemy of the crown. Jon Snow, a deserter from the Night's Watch, would be hunted like a dog. And Ned Stark, once the Hand of the King, now wore the title of fugitive. The Lannisters wouldn't wait. Joffrey would scream for blood. Cersei would plot her revenge behind that cold smile of hers. And worse, they still had Sansa, leverage that could break a father's will. The group moved with brutal purpose, taking only the wildest roads through the Riverlands. They slept in caves or under thick canopies of pine. Ghost scouted ahead, catching the scent of any patrol long before they could be seen. Varys's spies had laid false trails in other directions, towards Storm's End, the Vale, even the Dornish borders, but they knew it wouldn't fool the Lannisters forever. It was on the third night, deep in the Whispering Wood, when things turned. They weren't alone anymore. A campfire flickered in the distance, too careful to be a hunter's. Robb signaled for silence, drawing his sword. Ghost went ahead first, silent as shadow. A low growl followed, then a whisper. Stand down, young wolf. Out from the shadows stepped a man in dark leather and a grey cloak, with the sigil of the direwolf hidden under the grime. Behind him came others, silent, grim-faced Northmen. Some wore the colours of House Glover, others bore the spears of House Mormont. They've been looking for you, the man said. Words spread like wildfire. Half the realm says you're dead. The other half says you started a war. Robb nodded. Then we best start acting like it. Ned stepped forward, slow but certain. Who commands here? A tall, weathered soldier stepped from the group. Lord Rose Bolton, my lord. Sent me ahead to find you. He's gathered men at the Twins. Your bannermen are waiting. And Walder Frey? Robb asked. Will he let us cross? The man smirked. Old Walder's sharpening both sides of his knife, but he's not picked a side yet. Not until he knows where the coin and power lean. Ned's voice dropped. Then we give him no choice. That night the fugitive wolf pack became an army. They moved northward like a silent storm, hundreds joining as they passed through the woods and back roads. The North had not forgotten its honor, and they had not forgotten Eddard Stark, but war was no longer a whisper. It had begun. The Lannisters moved quicker than anyone expected. In the Red Keep, Queen Cersei's rage was quiet but absolute. The second it was confirmed that Ned Stark had escaped, she ordered half the gold cloaks executed for treason. The other half was sent into the city's darkest corners, shaking down whores, drunkards, and merchants for answers. But the trail was already cold. The spider had seen to that. You let him slip through your fingers, she spat at Varys during a council meeting, her voice trembling with fury. And now the North will rise. Varys only bowed, hands clasped, expression unreadable. I serve the realm, your grace, and the realm bleeds when wolves are cornered. Joffrey slammed his fist on the throne's armrest, his boyish voice shrill with anger. I want his head. I want them all dead, Robb, Jon, Arya, every last one. But Sansa, standing like a ghost beside the throne, said nothing. She had stopped crying days ago. Her eyes were hollow now, colder than the winter her father once spoke of. Cersei noticed the change, but said nothing. The girl was broken, or so she believed. Far from the capital, in the muddy fields of the Riverlands, the Stark party moved swiftly, taking back roads and avoiding known villages. They slept little, ate less, and rode like death itself was chasing them. And in truth it was. Lannister scouts had been spotted near Maidenpool. A small skirmish broke out near the Blackwater Rush. 3 Stark men killed, but 1 Lannister captured. The prisoner didn't last long. Jon Snow made sure of that. When he returned from the trees wiping Longclaw clean, no one asked what was said. "You're colder," Robb told him that night by the fire. "Colder than I've ever seen you." Jon didn't look up. "I left the wall. I can't go back. I've made my choice." Ned watched them both from across the fire. 2 boys carrying weight far beyond their years. Robb trying to lead men twice his age. Jon scarred by truths he'd never asked for. And himself, a father whose honor had almost destroyed them all. The guilt never left him. Not even now. On the 5th night, they reached the banks of the Green Fork. The twins loomed ahead, 2 towers on either side of the river, linked by a bridge that belonged to House Frey. And old Walder Frey had never given anything freely. A horn sounded. The gate creaked open. Lord Roose Bolton met them at the bridge, pale as a corpse, flanked by men whose eyes never smiled. "My lords," Roose said with a nod, "Walder expects you." They entered the hall of the twins under heavy watch. The stench of wet dog and sour wine filled the air. Walder Frey sat slouched in his chair, surrounded by daughters and grandsons he barely bothered to name. His eyes lit up with amusement when he saw Ned. Well, the dead wolf walks after all," Walder said, picking at his teeth. "I thought the Lannisters had your head on a spike by now." "I'm not dead yet," Ned replied, standing tall despite the ache in his bones. "Pity. Might have gotten me a better deal with Tywin," Frey muttered. Robb stepped forward. "We need to cross, and we'll pay what's fair," Walder cackled. "Fair? I'm not interested in fair, boy. I want gain. You're fugitives now. The crown will want your heads. Why shouldn't I just hand you over?" The room tensed. Swords were loosened in sheaths. Ghost let out a low growl, but Walder wasn't finished. Still, I do like a gamble. And if your little rebellion works, I'll be a hero for helping. So here's my offer. Marry one of my girls. One of you. Doesn't matter which. I want a Stark in my family, and then maybe I let you cross." Robb hesitated. Ned opened his mouth, but Jon spoke first. "No." All eyes turned to him. Walder raised a brow. "The bastard speaks." Jon stepped forward, voice like steel. "We're not selling ourselves for a bridge. You want loyalty? Fight for it. Earn it," Walder chuckled. "Brave little snowflake, aren't you?" But Ned saw something flicker in the old man's eyes. Respect, maybe, or interest. Or greed. The phrase were nothing if not predictable. After hours of tense negotiation, a deal was struck. Not for marriage yet, but for safe passage and temporary alliance. Walder would wait to see how the war turned before demanding more. That night, the Starks crossed the bridge and left behind the twins. They rode north toward River Run, where Catelyn waited with her father's banners. War was no longer coming, it was here. And the wolves had returned to the forest. River Run stood like a battered lion holding its ground, its stone walls weathered, the Tully banners hanging heavy with river mist, and the air thick with the tension of approaching war. For Catelyn Stark, every day since Ned's capture had been a prayer spoken in silence, every breath a bitter mixture of hope and dread. She had dreamed of seeing her husband's face again, but never dared believe it could happen. When the riders were first spotted at the eastern ridge, no one knew what to expect. Ravens had arrived days earlier. Whispers of Ned's escape, of Robb's march, of the bastard Jon Snow riding beside them like a ghost risen from legend. Many thought it was a trick, a trap, or simply lies meant to draw out the last loyal houses. But when Catelyn saw Ned dismount in the courtyard, limping, wrapped in a northern cloak, his hair thinner and his face paler but his eyes still unmistakably his, she forgot herself. She ran. She didn't care about the dozen lords and knights standing around her. She didn't care about dignity or diplomacy. She just ran to him. He caught her like he had when they were young, arms firm, breath ragged, eyes closed. For a moment, all the noise of war vanished. "I thought I'd never see you again," she whispered, trembling in his arms. "I thought the same," Ned said, voice hoarse. "But our sons wouldn't let me die." Robb stood a few paces back, his face unreadable. He looked older than when he had left Winterfell. Catelyn saw it right away. His boyish warmth had been carved away by blood and responsibility. And John, the boy she had never called son, stood nearby, silent and watchful, his direwolf keeping to the shadows. That night the war council gathered. Lords of the Riverlands in the north packed the great hall, each carrying their own grudges, ambitions, and hopes. Blackfish Tully stood to Ned's right, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. Bruce Bolton loomed near the back, whispering with his pale-eyed men. Great John Umber had already drunk half a cask of wine, and was growling about cutting Lannisters in half with a single swing. It was chaos, until Ned Stark raised his voice. "We do not fight for revenge," he said, his voice still weak but commanding. "We fight for justice. We fight for the North." Some nodded. Others murmured. But one man, Sir Rickard Karstark, stood and slammed his fist against the table. "They killed my sons," he said coldly. "I fight for their blood. I don't care about justice anymore." Ned looked at him for a long moment. "Then you'll never be satisfied. Because even when all the Lannisters lie dead, your grief will remain." The room fell into silence. Catelyn, watching from the side, saw the weight her husband carried. He was a man who should have died with honor in King's Landing, but had lived with disgrace instead. Some in that hall respected him more for escaping. Others questioned if he had been broken by the Lannisters. Jon, ever the outsider, said nothing. He kept to the edge of the council, observing, analyzing. More than once, Ned looked at him as if struggling to find words for something long buried. But it wasn't until the Blackfish spoke that the room turned. "Lord Stark lives," he said plainly, "and he brings with him a cause worth following. But if we are to make war, let us speak plainly. Are we fighting to rescue Sansa, to avenge insults, or are we fighting to break free of the South once and for all?" A hush followed. Then Greatjon stood slamming his cup down. "Why kneel to a boy who wears his mother's crown? Let the South fight their own damned wars. The North was a kingdom once. It can be again." Others began to murmur in agreement. The idea spread like fire, freedom, not just revenge. But Ned raised his hand. "I did not come here to crown myself a king," he said. "I came to protect my people. If we choose war, it must be because peace is no longer possible. Not because we hunger for thrones." Robb stood beside him. "Then let me lead," he said. "I have no crown, but I carry your blood. If the North must march, let it march behind me." And for the first time, Jon spoke, quietly, carefully. "If Robb is to lead, he must lead without question. And if Sansa remains in their hands, we cannot hesitate. Every day we wait is another she spends in a lion's den." The Blackfish looked to Ned. "Is he right? Will you let your daughter rot behind their walls while we argue over titles?" Ned closed his eyes. "No," he whispered. "We move at dawn." The northern host moved like a storm, silent, swift, and growing by the day. By the time they left River Run, over 20,000 marched under Stark and Tully banners, with more joining from scattered hill tribes and vassal houses who had waited too long to strike back at the lions. But though the numbers gave hope, Ned Stark knew better than to trust numbers alone. Men were not just swords. They were tempers, secrets, and loyalties that shifted like snow in the wind. It was war now. There would be no second chances. They split the army in two. Roose Bolton would take the larger force west to confront the Lannisters head-on at the Green Fork, drawing Tywin Lannister into open battle. Meanwhile, Robb led a smaller force south with the most trusted men, Umber, Blackfish, Stark loyalists, and his father, who, despite his injuries, refused to be left behind again. Catelyn stood on the walls of River Run, watching them ride out. She kissed Robb's brow and gripped Jon's hand, something she'd never done before. Her eyes lingered on Ned, and for a brief second he looked like the man she had married, whole, steady, unbent. But that moment passed quickly. The march south was harsh. The rivers ran red with rumor. Villages burned along the borders. Lannister outriders were everywhere, cutting off supplies and spreading fear. They knew the wolves were coming. On the 7th day, scouts brought troubling news. Jaime Lannister had taken the field, and worse, he had hostages. "Lord Edmure was captured trying to hold the fords," Blackfish reported grimly. "He's being kept at Harrenhal under heavy guard. They'll use him to bait us." Ned clenched his jaw. Harrenhal, a cursed place, its twisted towers and melted stone walls left behind by dragonfire and haunted by the screams of the dead. He had been there once, during Robert's rebellion, and swore never to return. But now the road led there again. "We ride for Harrenhal," Robb said without hesitation. "Let the Kingslayer come to us." But the road was never simple. That night John stood watch by the riverbank, ghost beside him. The moon glowed silver on the water, but something in the air felt wrong. Too still, too quiet. He turned at the sound of footsteps and saw Theon Greyjoy approaching, eyes narrow, movements twitchy. "You don't sleep much," Theon muttered. "Not since we broke him out," John replied. Theon snorted. "You sound like you regret it." John's voice stayed low. "I don't, but war isn't glory. It's weight, and it's only getting heavier." Theon looked at him for a long moment, then smirked. "Maybe you're just not used to being more than the bastard at the table." John didn't rise to it. He knew Theon well, too well, and he'd seen the shift in him lately. The way he rode ahead when he wasn't ordered. The way he asked questions that felt too sharp. The way he talked about his father, Balon, and the Iron Islands, like a fire waiting to be fed. "You planning something?" John asked softly. Theon's eyes flashed. "Planning? No, but maybe it's time someone remembered who they really are." The next morning a raven arrived, bearing a message that chilled every man to his bones. Sansa Stark had been wed to Joffrey Baratheon. It wasn't just news. It was war made personal. The letter was sealed with Lannister red, written in perfect courtly language, but the message was pure venom. Sansa had been married to the boy king with honor and grace, and now bore the title of Queen Consort. No word of her consent. No sign of her safety. Just a public slap across the face of House Stark. Robb exploded in fury. He tore the letter in half, threw it into the fire, and ordered scouts south to find a faster path to King's Landing. But Ned stopped him. "This is bait," he said quietly. "They want us to march on the capital. They want us blind with rage." "She's my sister," Robb growled. "They've turned her into a pawn." "She's still alive," John added, "and that means she's still useful to them. That's the only thing keeping her breathing." Ned said nothing for a long moment. Then finally he looked to the map stretched before them and pointed to Harrenhal. "We take Jaime," he said. "We take him alive, and then we trade, one lion for one wolf." But they didn't know that not all lions were caged, and not all wolves were loyal. In the camp's shadows, a rider slipped away before dawn. Hooded, fast, silent, Theon Greyjoy was gone, and with him went their last chance at unity. The road to Harrenhal was soaked with blood long before the northern host arrived. Villages on the outskirts were nothing but scorched wood and blackened corpses, burned by Lannister soldiers as they retreated behind the fortress's walls. Crops were torched, livestock slaughtered. It was not war, it was warning. Jaime Lannister wanted the wolves to know. If they were coming for him, they'd pay for every mile. But the Stark banners did not waver. As they crested a ridge overlooking the river God's Eye, Harrenhal came into view, massive, broken, and monstrous. Its towers stood like blackened bones reaching for the sky, melted and twisted by the breath of Aegon's dragons centuries ago. The fortress had never been rebuilt properly. Its walls were cracked, its halls echoed with curses, and no house that took it ever held it for long. "This place was cursed long before Jaime Lannister set foot in it," Ned murmured, staring down at the shadowed ruin. "Aye," said the Blackfish grimly. "Now it's a trap." But still they had to go in. Scouts returned with reports. Jaime had taken the western courtyard and turned it into a slaughter pen. Edmure Tully was alive, held somewhere deep within the walls. The garrison was heavy, 2,000 Lannister men, well-fed and well-armed, dug into stone. But morale was breaking. Whispers of Ned Stark's escape had spread like wildfire, and more than a few southern soldiers feared what it meant when wolves started walking through fire. They began the siege that night. No horns, no banners raised, just slow, quiet death creeping in through the woods and shadows. The northern men surrounded Harrenhal like a tightening noose. Cut off the food. Cut off the water. Let the ghosts inside eat the Lannisters alive. But Jaime Lannister wasn't the kind to wait. On the third night the Kingslayer struck. He led a raid through the northern side of the keep, targeting the watchtowers. Dozens of Stark men were killed before the alarm was even raised. When Robb arrived at the battle, sword in hand, he found the ground slick with blood and the air thick with screams. Jaime, golden hair wild and sword dancing like flame, moved through the chaos like a demon. He locked blades with Robb on the stairs of the ruined tower. "You must be the young wolf," Jaime sneered. "Shame I'll have to break your neck before your balls drop." Robb didn't answer. He struck hard, fast, steel clashing on steel. Jaime laughed as they fought, as if war was a game and Robb just another foolish player. But then Jon appeared from the smoke, blade drawn, Ghost snarling at his heels. Jaime turned, grin widening. "Ah, the bastard. The Night's Watch boy who ran away." Jon's eyes were ice. "You've spilled enough northern blood, and I'll spill more," Jaime hissed, lunging forward. The three of them fought in the half-ruined tower, blades flashing, boots slipping on blood-soaked stone. It was brutal. No fancy tricks, no dancing flourishes, just rage and survival. Ghost leapt at Jaime, forcing him back long enough for Jon to slash across his side. Jaime fell to a knee, bleeding, gasping, but still laughing. "You boys don't know the game you're playing," he said, spitting blood. "You think this ends when I fall?" Jon raised his blade. "No, it ends when you answer for what you've done." But Ned's voice rang out behind them. "Stop!" He stepped into the tower, flanked by Blackfish and the Greatjon, his face stone. "Take him alive," Ned ordered. Robb hesitated. So did Jon, but in the end they obeyed. Jaime Lannister was bound in iron and dragged from Harrenhal as the North claimed the cursed keep. Edmure was found in the lower cells, beaten but alive. The fortress belonged to the wolves now, and yet, as the men celebrated and the banners of House Stark rose over the blackened towers, Ned stood on the ramparts and looked east, because a letter had arrived that night. From Theon, he had returned to the Iron Islands. Balon Greyjoy was raising his fleet, and worse, he had taken Winterfell. Bran and Rickon were missing, and suddenly the wolves had no home to return to. Snow began to fall early that year. It came in thin sheets across the riverlands, covering the blood-soaked earth around Harrenhal in a blanket of white silence. The Northmen said it was the old gods weeping. Ned Stark said nothing. He stood in the black tower above the courtyard, looking at the frozen banners, the wounded soldiers, the prison where Jaime Lannister now sat in chains, and the letter still clenched in his hand. "Winterfell has fallen. Your youngest sons are missing. The traitor wears your name." The words were written in haste, sealed with the direwolf sigil by Maester Luwin's trembling hand, sent by Raven from a hidden camp near the Wolfswood, where the survivors of the sack had fled. Theon Greyjoy had taken the castle with ironborn reavers in the dead of night. He claimed the north for the drowned god and declared himself Prince of Winterfell. Robb shattered a goblet when he heard. Jon didn't speak. Catelyn, upon receiving a second raven, collapsed in grief and fury. Her last letter spoke of Bran and Rickon, neither found. Some believed they had fled. Others whispered they were dead. And Ned Stark broke in a way that didn't show on the outside. He didn't scream. He didn't curse. He just sat by the fire that night, with Jon across from him, staring into the flames, like he could will time to reverse. "I raised Theon like a son," he finally said, his voice hoarse. "Fed him, taught him, and this is how he repays it." Jon looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "He was never ours." "He could have been," Ned whispered more to himself than to Jon. "But I never made him feel like it. I never truly let him in. Maybe that was my failure. You gave him mercy," Jon said. "The same mercy that saved your life." Ned turned to him. "And mercy may cost us everything." That night Ned gathered his closest advisors, Robb, Jon, the Blackfish, Greatjon Umber and Rose Bolton, and laid out a grim new course. "The Lannisters have been hurt," he said. "But our war is no longer just with them. We've lost our home. If we delay, the Ironborn will root themselves deep into our soil. We ride north." Rose Bolton, cold and quiet, said nothing. His eyes gleamed beneath the candlelight like twin blades. "And what of King's Landing?" the Blackfish asked. "You still have a daughter there." "And the Kingslayer. We keep Jaime alive," Ned said. "We'll trade him for Sansa, but first we take back what's ours." Jon nodded slowly. "You want me to go ahead?" Ned looked at him. "You know the North better than most, and you don't carry a banner. If you can slip into Winterfell, find the boys, if they live, then perhaps we can strike faster." Jon didn't hesitate. "I'll go." Ghost stirred at his side, ready. The war council ended with no cheers, no pride, only resolve. The next morning, the army split once more. Robb would take the majority of the host through the neck, pushing toward Moat Cailin. Ned would stay close to the prisoners, including Jaime, and march slowly to mask Jon's departure. Jon rode north with a handful of rangers and silent men. As he vanished into the woods, not even the wind dared speak his name. Back in Harrenhal, Jaime Lannister wasted no time digging beneath the skin of his captors. "Do you know what mercy does, Lord Stark?" he asked from his cell, grinning behind bruised lips. "It rots your spine. You'll watch your family die one by one, and still you'll cling to honor like it means something. Just like you did in King's Landing." Ned didn't reply. He only watched the Kingslayer in silence. "You should have let me die," Jaime said softly, "because I'll never give you what you want." And Ned, in that moment, finally understood something. Jaime wasn't afraid of death. He was afraid of truth. Later that week, Sansa's third letter arrived, this time penned in her own hand, but the writing was odd, too formal, too rehearsed. Her words spoke of loyalty to Joffrey, of happiness in her new role, of wanting peace. Catelyn wept when she read it. "She's writing under their watch," she whispered. "Our girl is alive, but they're breaking her." Ned folded the letter gently. "Not for long." That night he wrote a message, not to King's Landing, not to the North, but to an old friend far across the sea. The letter began simply, "To Sir Jorah Mormont. If you still serve the Dragon Queen, tell her the North remembers." The pieces are moving. The air in the North was sharper than Jon remembered. Winter had begun to settle early, the kind that crept into your bones, not with snowstorms, but silence, the kind of stillness that came before a blade fell. As Jon rode through the ghost paths near the Wolfswood, cloaked in black and flanked by only 3 silent rangers, he saw the smoke rising from Winterfell days before they reached it. Black smoke, slow, purposeful, the kind sent up by men who were trying to show they owned something they didn't understand. Theon Greyjoy had taken Winterfell, but he hadn't conquered it. He had occupied hollow halls, silenced voices that once echoed with laughter, and claimed a castle that was more than stone. It was a memory, and now it stood twisted under his name, the Greyjoy Kraken flying where the direwolf once did. Jon watched from the tree line that first night. He saw the walls were barely guarded. Most of Theon's men were drunk or tired or both. The townsfolk had been pushed inside the walls, made into servants or prisoners. There were no smiles, no laughter, just fear. And still, no sign of Bran, no sign of Rickon. He slipped in through the crypts. It was a passage only true Northerners remembered, a tunnel beneath the old tombs, hidden behind the statue of Brandon Stark. Cold air blew up from the depths as Jon stepped through with Ghost beside him. The darkness inside was thick and tight, the walls weeping with old water and age. But Jon didn't hesitate. He moved through memory and death like a whisper. And there, hidden in a hollow behind Lyanna Stark's statue, was a boy. "Rickon," Jon whispered. The boy blinked, too pale, too thin. He looked ready to scream, until Ghost stepped forward, and he gasped instead. "Jon!" He rushed into Jon's arms without hesitation. Jon clutched him tightly, heart pounding. "Where's Bran?" Rickon pulled away, pointing deeper into the dark. "He's down there. He can't walk, but he says the trees told him you were coming." Jon stared at the boy. "What?" But there was no time. Bran sat in the cold, bundled in old cloaks and furs, eyes calm but distant, far too distant for a boy his age. When he looked at Jon, he smiled faintly. "I saw you, in the fire, and in the snow." Jon knelt beside him, his voice catching. "Bran, I'm here. You're safe now." "No," Bran said softly. "Not yet." Jon knew he was right. Getting in was easy. Getting out wouldn't be. Theon had filled the castle with men who didn't belong, cutthroats from the sea, sellswords who didn't care about north or name. But there were still a few servants loyal to House Stark, quiet ones who left food in the crypts, whispered warnings, and sharpened kitchen knives while no one was looking. Jon waited 2 days. Then just before dawn he moved. With Rickon riding hidden under furs and Bran strapped to a cart behind Ghost, Jon led them through the tunnels again. But this time, Theon was waiting. Not by the crypts, but at the gate. He had known. Somehow he had known. "Thought I'd smell a wolf crawling in the dark," Theon said, stepping out with his men. "You always did think you were better than me." Jon didn't speak. He pulled his sword slowly, Ghost growling low behind him. Theon stepped forward, grinning like a man who had nothing left to lose. "Maybe I was never one of you, but I have your castle. I have your name, and now I'll have your head too, bastard." But then came the horn. Not Theon's, the North's. From the trees beyond the gate, thousands poured in, Robb's army, silent no longer. Roose Bolton's flank swept around the back. The Blackfish led riders through the side gate. Catelyn rode with them, hair wild in the wind. Ned was not far behind, sword drawn, eyes burning with something colder than vengeance. Theon turned too late. His men scattered. Some ran, some died. The rest surrendered. Winterfell roared back to life with blood and iron. Jon faced Theon in the snow as the fighting ended. Theon dropped his sword. "I only wanted to matter," he said quietly. "To someone." Jon looked at him. "You could have." And then he turned his back, leaving Theon to be dragged away in chains. Later, Ned Stark walked through the gates of Winterfell, his eyes glancing over every broken stone, every scorched banner. When he saw Jon carrying Bran from the crypts, he stopped and bowed his head. Not out of sorrow, but out of something deeper, respect. That night fires were lit, not for mourning, but for reclaiming. The North was not defeated. The wolves had come home. In the Godswood beneath the Heart Tree, Ned Stark knelt beside Bran and whispered something the boy would never repeat. And far away across the narrow sea, a raven landed in the hand of a silver-haired queen. She read the letter, her lips forming the final words aloud. "The North remembers, and we are ready."